Welcome to Layer the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, another in my series of Milestone Moments. These are moments in a band's career that helps define and shape them. These can be albums that push the limits and boundaries of rock music, helping create a new subgenre. So the band that I've picked for today is King Crimson and their 1969 debut album, In the Court of the Crimson King, with the subtitle, An Observation by King Crimson. Really cool album cover here. This is an album that many people would consider to be one of the first progressive rock albums and one of the most influential progressive rock albums. And it's easy to understand why, because for 1969, this is really ahead of its time. And it combines a lot of different styles and elements, but does it in a very cohesive way. It really makes it work, and it flows very well. You've got heavy rock on here at moments. You've got jazz and jazz fusion, like rhythms and jamming and stretching out. You've got classical style arrangements with horns and layered stuff. You've got avant-garde sections that are sort of experimental, noisy type things. You've got some cinematic feeling stuff, very epic and grand feel across the whole record. It's a very sort of dark, psychedelic rock type vibe to it at times too. It's like kind of coming out of the 60s. You can see that little bit of that trippy, moody, psychedelic vibe to it, but King Crimson brings it into sort of a dark corner that I'm not sure anybody was really experimenting with at that time. The album was produced by the band, and for its time, it sounds really good. It's got a really nice kind of warm quality to it. You can hear all the instruments. It's got when a lot of this keyboard sounds kick in and the layered wind stuff, it has a very lush, rich sound. It's very dynamic. I don't have this on CD. I was only listening to it on my vinyl. And there's spots where it gets really quiet, and there's other spots where it just builds up really, really big. Something I miss about modern recordings and the way a lot of people record now. You don't get a lot of this where bands back then weren't afraid to get really, really quiet and contrast that with louder sections. And because of those quiet sections, it makes the louder sections sound that much bigger and that much more dramatic. The musicianship on the album is just fantastic. You've got Robert Fripp on guitar. He can move between more sort of intense, heavier lead type fusiony type lines to more like cleaner, jazzy type moments or more experimental type things, textural type things. Greg Lake on vocals and bass. He has his vocals on this. He can go from really sort of like just the whole album where he's singing very sort of ethereal and light to more dramatic and more intense. He's got a really nice, clean, kind of like a high baritone range, I would say. Mike Gills on drums, really great drumming with at times very jazzy, at other times very progressive rock type drummings. Ian McDonald, he's on all the wind instruments. You've got like sax, flute, clarinet. I'm probably missing some. He also plays some piano and organ on this. And this is what really makes this album special to me, is the way the wind instruments and the keyboards and the mellotrons are creating like these string type sounds are all sort of layered together in this real sort of orchestral, lush sound that makes certain sections sound really big and really huge. All the lyrics on the record are written by Peter Seinfeld, and the lyrics on the album are just great. I'm going to get into some of the lyrics a little bit later. So the album starts with King Crimson's probably most recognizable song, 21st Century Schizoid Man. The beginning riff is very metal-like, very ahead of its time for 1969. Sounds like something Sabbath would have played maybe on their Paranoid album or something. Very heavy, and the heaviness is really created. It's funny, when I revisited this record, in my mind I was thinking that was a heavy distorted guitar, because I've heard this song covered a bunch of times by people, and that's usually what it is, just a one heavy distorted guitar, but it's really created here with all the wind instruments and the keyboard sounds all really tightly together that creates this big heavy riff, which just goes to show you can sound really heavy. You don't need just heavy, just distorted guitar to sound heavy. You can do that with just the tone of the riff, the instruments that you layer in there. The vocal line has a distorted effect on it, which adds to sort of the lyrics, the crazy schizoid, futuristic schizoid man vibe of the whole song. There's an awesome section in the middle. I love when it goes into like this jazz fusion, like the band is just jamming out in that spot. And when I listened to it, I thought, so many bands cover this. I don't really remember anybody doing that fusion section, because it's out there, man. They're jamming hard. There's all these syncopated accents and everything. And I went back and I knew Ozzy did a cover of it, and I haven't heard that in ages. So I listened to it, and they don't even play that section. They just skip over that whole thing, which is a shame, because to me that's like one of the coolest sections of the song. And I love, there's also a spot where they play this riff like ba da 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 da, just gets faster and more intense. So really cool, love it. Then it totally switches gears and it goes into the next song, I Talk to the Wind, which is very sort of ethereal, floating on clouds type of vibe. Greg Lake's vocals are very relaxed and mellow and gentle. There's flutes sort of floating around in it, and it just has this sort of dreamy, light, airy vibe to it. Little harmonics, I think, on the guitar, the bass, and just little synthesizer things sort of taking you away and floating away on a cloud type of feel. Side 1 ends with Epitaph, which is probably my second favorite song after 21st Century Schizoid Man. And this is a great example of building mood and dynamics. There's the song just builds and grows really, really well. And it does that through the orchestrations with the keyboards and the winds, just these parts where it can get really mellow, and then it gets really just lush in full and just sort of opens up into this really grand, almost cinematic type of sounds. Just really, really nice crescendos and dynamics to that one. The next side 2, is starts with Moonchild. The vocals have this effect on it that give it like a spacey, out there, psychedelic. This is again the sort of that trippy, dark psychedelic vibe that they sometimes tap into. Another cool one, really sort of mellow, just real subtle little things going on throughout the song. And Moonchild ends with like an sort of an avant-garde free-form sound effect thing where there's just little guitar things and little noises and cymbal noises and little sounds kind of coming in and out in sort of a noise collage, a sound collage experimental way, which I think sort of fits this sort of weird dark psychedelic vibe of the song. The album ends with the song The Court of the Crimson King, and it's got some different sections within it, right? Nothing says progressive rock like a song with a bunch of, part 1, part 2 things underneath it. And here you get including the Return of the Fire Witch and the Dance of the Puppets. And I mentioned earlier how great the lyrics are on this album, and I wanted to read the one verse in this because this is another song that just these different sections and builds really nicely. This is probably the second heaviest type song, intense type song on the album. And I just love the lyrics in it. The second verse, the keeper of the city keys put shutters on the dreams. I wait outside the pilgrim's door with insufficient schemes. The Black Queen chants the funeral march. The cracked brass bells will ring to summon back the fire witch to the court of the Crimson King. It's it's like somebody reading you a dark, evil bedtime story. I love it, man. The lyrics in it, the lyrics on the whole album are great, but the lyrics in this particular song are just awesome. Very, you throw in. I've said this before: bells, witches. I'm a sucker for all that kind of stuff. So this is a real awesome one. Again, it builds really nicely. It's got all these different sections to it, so just really cool. So this is a really awesome album, and I can see why this was so influential on progressive rock, because you have all these different elements: the jazz, the avant-garde, the syncopated rhythms, the great playing from everybody involved, the cinematic aspects of this, the sort of grand feel of the whole epic grand feel that goes across a lot of the album, and sort of the concept like feel of like the last song and everything. So, and it was just, ahead of its time. A lot of bands after this then would take elements from this and go with this, either one aspect or a couple different aspects from this album, and take influence from it. So, all right, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of King Crimson in the Court of the Crimson King. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe. Lair the Alchemist on Facebook. Lair the Alchemist on Twitch. And until we see you again, make sure you rock hard, ride free.